Hi everyone. Today I'll be showing you how to install an OpenVPN server at home. This can be used to connect to your home network from anywhere and has the advantage of increased privacy if you ever need to connect to an unsecured wireless network when you're out and about. Before we start, this tutorial is specifically about the process for setting up OpenVPN on Debian 12. The process should be virtually identical on any Debian-based distribution such as Ubuntu. You'll need root access or sudo privileges on the machine you want to install on. I would recommend setting this up on a virtual machine all for itself, but this is of course not required by any means. Now, OpenVPN is not particularly resource intensive. I usually set my instances up with, say, 2 gigs of RAM, 4 gigs of storage, and a single core. In my experience, this should be more than enough for typical home use. So let's go ahead and get started. First, we're going to switch to the root user, and then we will do a check for any updates. Always good practice. Seems like we're all up to date, so we're good to proceed. First thing we're going to do is install OpenVPN, EasyRSA, and a text editor. I'm going to get Vim. The package EasyRSA is what we'll be using to handle our PKI, or our public key infrastructure. This is what's responsible for managing things like issuing certificates or revoking them to and from our clients. So now that's done, we need to set up a certificate authority for the VPN service. We'll use EasyRSA to do this, and we'll tell it to make a directory for this purpose inside of our OpenVPN configuration directory. So to do that, we'll run make creator etc OpenVPN EasyRSA, and then we'll go ahead and switch to that directory. Now, before going any further, we should go ahead and just double check that we have a static IP set up. So to that end, let's check etc network interfaces. And we see that my network interface down here is actually set up to use DHCP, so let's go ahead and fix that. We'll switch that to static, set up an address, a net mask, and a gateway. And we'll go ahead and write that. And then we will restart the networking service. Okay, we can go ahead and run IP address to verify that our address was properly loaded from that configuration, and you can see that it was. So now that that's done, and we're in the EasyRSA directory that we created, we can go ahead and use the included EasyRSA script to do some of the work for us. So the first thing we're going to run is this init PKI, which will initialize the public key infrastructure. And then once more with this build CA. We'll need to pick a passphrase. Once more. And then you'll need to choose a common name as well. Usually for this, I would choose something like VPN CA. Remember, this is creating the certificate for the actual certificate authority itself. Now that that's done, we'll use the EasyRSA script to generate the Diffie-Hellman parameters. These are the parameters that are used in the key exchange. This could take a while, by the way, depending on the resources you allocated to your machine. Just be prepared for this to take a few minutes. Okay, now that that's done, we'll go ahead and create a certificate for the VPN server itself. So using the EasyRSA script, we'll run with the command genrec for generate request, and then a name for the server. I'm going to be calling mine VPN tutorial, but you can of course call yours whatever you'd like, and then as well the no pass parameter so that we don't have to deal with that. You can choose a common name. Once again, I usually just go with the host name of the server, so in this case VPN tutorial. And then you'll need to use the script to sign that request. So you'll pass signRec for sign request, specify that this is for a server, and then the name of the server. Type yes to confirm. You'll need to provide the passphrase. And now we're done with that. And now we'll have to copy some of these files back up into the OpenVPN configuration directory. So to do that, we can just copy. We'll need the Diffie-Hellman parameters. We'll need the CA certificate. We will need the VPN servers certificate. And we will also need the VPN server's private key. We're going to put these in etc OpenVPN. Now, one last step is to generate a certificate for the client. So we're going to use that script again, same process, genrec. Name for the client, I'll be going with riskj. You can do whatever you'd like, no pass. And then you'll need to sign that request, but specify this time that it is a client and then the name of the client. Type yes to confirm. You need to provide the passphrase. Now that that's done, we need to actually set up a configuration file for the VPN service that we want to run. So to that end, we can just copy one of the sample configurations. There's one located in user, share, doc, OpenVPN, examples, sample config files, server.conf, and we'll put that in etc OpenVPN. And you can name this anything you like. I'm going to name mine vpn.conf. And let's go ahead and make some edits to that file. So a few things that we're going to want to look at and possibly change in here. First is this local parameter. We're going to change this to be the static IP that we configured earlier. This is the address that the service will be listening on. This is the port. You can change this if you'd like, but 1194 is standard. I'll be leaving mine as a UDP server. I recommend you keeping this at a tunnel device unless you know what you're doing. The tab device, to my understanding, has quite a bit different configuration required. Here, these cert and key parameters will need to be changed to whatever we named our server earlier. So in my example, that is VPN tutorial, but yours will most likely be different. One final thing, this Diffie-Hellman file here, the file that we created that contained our parameters is just called dh.pem, so we will change that here to reflect it. This line commented out topology subnet, we'll go ahead and uncomment that. The subnet topology will allow us to actually reach other hosts on our local network from our remote clients, which is usually something that we want. This server line here, we can go ahead and just leave unchanged. This is specifying the IP address range that any clients connecting will be assigned an address from. So for example, if one of our remote clients connects to our network, they'll be assigned an IP address of, for example, 10.8.0.4 or 5. You can change this to whatever you'd like. Here is where we have the opportunity to push routes to our clients. I will go ahead and change this to reflect my home network's network address. So for me, that's 10.0.0.0.255.255.255.0. It's hard to say. You should change this to reflect whatever your home network looks like. So for example, if you were on 192.0.0.0, you would change that here. If you have multiple subnets that you need routed, you can configure them one by one, giving them one line each. Let's just quickly look through the rest of this. And this looks okay, so we'll go ahead and write that configuration file. Next thing, let's move up a directory, and then let's generate the TLS auth key. So we'll run OpenVPN genkey secret ta.key. It complains about there being a deprecated option, but don't worry, it works just fine. One last thing, we need to enable IP forwarding. So we will go to etc syscontrol and find the line that is IP forward. Here it is, and just go ahead and uncomment that. Write that, and then we'll need to reload that configuration. So run syscontrol p etc syscontrol.conf, and you can see it prints out that line there that we made different, so we know that that's good. And now we can finally go ahead and enable and start the VPN service. So with OpenVPN, you need to specify the name of the configuration file, after an @ sign when you start the service. Because I named my configuration file VPN, I'll start the service like so. System control start OpenVPN @ VPN. So if you had named your configuration file example.conf, you instead would write OpenVPN @ example. Well, mine's VPN, so I will write VPN. And then we will go ahead and enable the same service. Okay, all looks good. One last thing, we'll want to copy some of these files that we just created to another machine for easier use in the next step. This could be to a desktop machine of yours or something similar. I'll use SCP for that purpose. First, let's switch back to this directory. I'll run scp pki ca. So we need the CA certificate. We will need the client certificate. We'll need the client's private key. And we will also need the TA key we just generated. Now I'll go ahead and transfer this to my other machine. Okay, now before we continue, just one thing to remember is that you should treat these keys very carefully. You should consider them just as secret as your most important passwords. Anyone that has control of these while this service is running will basically have unrestricted access to your network. So not something you want to let get out. Okay, I'm back now on the machine that I just copied those files to. So we're going to go ahead and create an OVPN profile, which is the actual file that we'll need to distribute to the machines that we want to make a remote connection from. We'll do just a bare bones configuration here. There's lots of options that you can put in here that you'll have to do your own research on. But the most important ones are client, to specify that this is a client configuration, a protocol, this will be UDP unless you changed it, a remote, this is your public IP address, or if you have a domain name that's pointing at your public IP address, you can use that instead. For example, if you're using something like dynamic DNS. For our purposes, I'll just put something like example.com, but remember to change this. Port, this is the port that you have open on your public interface. So for example, even if you change this port number to something else internally, that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be different in this file. Because in the next step, we're going to forward a port from our public interface, and you can always tell your router to forward port 1194 to whatever internal port you have listening on the VPN server that you changed in the configuration file. But for our purposes, I'll just leave it as 1194 here. And debtune, unless you change this to a TAT device as well. Next, we'll need to set up these sort of HTML-like tags. One for the CA certificate, one for the client certificate, one for the client key, and one for the TLS auth key. And then I have those files here, and we'll just copy them in between these tags. So there's the CA certificate, here's the client certificate, here's the client private key, and just as a reminder, these are not my real keys. These are just for demonstration purposes. If these were my real keys, you absolutely would not want to be showing them publicly like this. These will never actually be used for any legitimate connections to my network. And now that that's done, you would just save this file. Canonically, you would do so with a .ovpn extension and distribute this to your remote machines, and you would load them in using an OpenVPN client. To my knowledge, every major operating system, including mobile devices like iOS or Android, has a pretty good OpenVPN client that will work just as you expect with these profiles. So the last step before you can actually use your new VPN server is to set up a couple things on your gateway or router. So the first thing you'll need to do is actually open a port to forward from the public interface to the server itself. So unfortunately, every router is going to have their configuration and menus and everything like that look a little bit different, but this is what mine looks like. I just navigate to the section for port forwarding. Yours will certainly have something similar. And we'll just need to go ahead and add a custom service. In typical router firmware fashion, this will take a very long time. Go ahead and specify a name for the service. I'll just call it VPN. This is on UDP. And you can pick whatever external port that you want to use, though this should match with the one that you specified in the OVPN profile earlier. So for us, that'll be 1194. And then internally on the VPN server, we have the same port 1194 listening, but we could change this to be something different if we wanted to, or if you set it up that way. And then you'll just need to point to the internal address that's hosting the service. So for us, that's 123. Go ahead and apply that. And you can see that here now. And the next step is we'll need to set up a static route. So this is so that all of our machines on our network actually know where to route traffic to in order for it to reach our remote clients. So we can name the route whatever we like. I'll call it VPN. The destination address here will be the 10.8.0.0, 255.255.255.0, and then the gateway. And the gateway in this case will be the machine that's actually hosting the VPN server. So 123. The metric, you can just put whatever, some low integer. I think actually different routers handle this number a little bit differently. I've found that on mine 3 works fine. And there you go. Now that this is all set up, you should be able to actually make a connection from outside your network.